So as a young girl living in Holland during the Nazi occupation, what were some of your experiences that may have had a profound influence on you as a youngster?
Well, that would be really at the beginning of the war when it started, because it was of course an experience that was totally out of your reality as a child. And I remember in the night that I woke up because there was some commotion in the house and it was 4 in the morning and I couldn't understand why my parents weren't in bed. And I heard this strong humming sound, but it didn't mean anything to me. And then I kind of got up because I was concerned, and when I looked out of the bedroom, I saw that my brothers and my parents were standing on the balcony watching something up in the sky. And so I got nervous and I grabbed my stockings and some clothes to put on. And I remember struggling with one stocking and finally decided to go outside without one. So I went with one needle stocking outside on the balcony and said, "What's going on?" And I looked up and I saw these huge planes, practically wing to wing and motor to tail. The sky was just obliterated by planes. And all of a sudden doors opened in these planes and all these paratroopers jumped out, and all these parachutes, and the sky was just white with parachutes. And of course the shooting started from the ground, from the Dutch army. And my father said, "Oh my God, war." And of course it still didn't mean too much to me, but I knew something was very, very wrong. Anyway, my father took us all downstairs and got my grandmother up. We went to the kitchen, and while we were standing there thinking of my father thinking what the best was to be done, we heard suddenly a loud knocking on the front door area and the windows, and we had a very large bay window with about, I would say about 8 to 10 rather large windows going around, forming a huge bay. And my father walked into the living room and told later what a strange sight it was, because for every window only the head was visible of these paratroopers, German paratroopers, and each window framed a paratrooper, a helmet and a face. Anyway, they told him that he had to open up the house, and so he came to the front door. And they went to the back of the house and they came through the kitchen door. They told him to let them in the back, because the front was suddenly being bombarded by guns from the army, the artillery that had discovered that something was happening at our house. And so they all trooped actually through the kitchen and the dining area, and my grandmother was actually a funny moment in time when you look back on it. We had just had the spring cleaning. It was May 10, 1940, and she was very strong always on spring cleaning, and she lived with us. And of course the house had just been done. And here came these paratroopers with boots that had come through a dirty ditch behind us where a farm was. And she was yelling them in Dutch to take their filthy boots off her clean carpet, which at that point didn't strike us funny, but later became a family story, of course, because it was ludicrous to say that when your life is at stake, of course. But anyway, we were all put into the kitchen and under guard. They also had 2 Dutch prisoners of war with them, and they were with us in the kitchen. And one was a captain and one was a foot soldier. But the captain at a certain point asked, and his name was Bieringa, I never forget the name, if he could phone Rotterdam, because his son was having that particular morning an appendectomy. And so he was kind of worried, his son was 12 years old or something. And so my father said, of course, and it was a phone that was hanging on the wall, and he took the phone, and the German that was in the kitchen with us, guiding us, saw it, and took his rifle, which was a bayonet, and just slashed the cord through. So he broke the connection. And so he never found out, and later he was actually murdered in the garden and before they fled the house. And so he never saw his little boy again. And so, but that was one incident, but we were still in the kitchen with the two prisoners. And at a certain point, this one prisoner asked if he could use the toilet. So the guard stood outside the toilet, which was right outside the kitchen. And he disappeared into the toilet and never came out again, because there was a tiny little window, and how he ever got out of that, he must have held his breath and squeezed his rib cage in some form or another through there, but he disappeared, never to be seen again. And so I hope he stayed alive and got away properly. But he came back in the kitchen, already slightly annoyed, of course. And the rest of the soldiers were lying in the living room shooting at the artillery that was shooting back at them. And so there was a lot of shooting. And then why it became very memorable, beside all the other stuff, was that this German took me suddenly in the hallway of the house and told my mother to give something white to me. And my mother was frightened, she didn't know what to do, and she didn't know what they were going to do. But she gave a white apron that she had as a Red Cross nurse, and he put it in my hand and then opened the front door and pushed me out, showing that I had to wave it. Mm-hmm. So that they could see that there was a child, obviously, in the house, and that there was a family, and so they wouldn't do direct hits on this house. And I think that was the most vivid moment. I was 10 years old, or almost 11, and there I stood, waving this apron, and all of a sudden the guns went silent, because they noticed that there was a little girl standing on the front steps waving a white apron, while there were, whole chunks had been shot out of the house. And so the guns fell silent, and it was that particular moment that I can't talk about without actually getting emotional. Because in the silence that fell, it was so peculiar, because we had a big holly bush in front of the steps. And in that bush was a bird. And the bird started to sing. And that moment never ever left me, because it was there that I realized, why more? Are they mad? I couldn't understand as a child. I thought they were all crazy. And so that was a big part of the beginning of the war for me, and a realization that something had drastically changed.
Yeah, it did. Now I understand that at that time also, during the war, that your father was working for the Dutch Underground. Yes,
he was, what he did, he was the editor of the newspaper in the city of The Hague. And he was always a very honest man. So his writings of the main articles often had a slant towards the occupational forces. But he was also, there was a newsletter that, because of the resistance, connections, he would get information about what was going on really that wasn't based on German propaganda, but came from the BBC or from other sources, and we had also our own connection in the house, carefully hidden, where we could get, my parents could get BBC information, which was funneled again to the resistance. So it was a back and forth kind of communication thing. And they, Hans, my brother, and my father worked very closely together on this newsletter in the last couple of years of the war. And I often helped with the distribution, and I must admit, I probably was about 14, that there was a certain danger attached to it, but you still don't really realize what could actually go wrong with something like that. But I remember one time that I had actually in my little handbag a few newsletters that I had to distribute to certain people, and I was walking and suddenly there was a post that had been set up where they were checking our papers, and I thought, there was a moment of hesitation of thinking, what am I going to do? I can't turn around because then they really come after me. So I just kept walking, gave them a big smile, and stopped, and they asked for my papers. Showed them to him, and they let me through. But I can tell you that I sweated quite a bit in the meantime. And I think my sons being both actors, I think they have inherited a bit from me, because they thought I was probably a very innocent child that just walked along and not knowing that I was hiding this in my pocket. I must have done a good act. That's what I was thinking. But anyway, eventually my father was tripped up. How it happened, we don't know, but I don't know if the German authorities got wise to the underlying language in his articles. But anyway, they came after him, or they had found out about connections with the resistance. Anyway, one day I came out of high school, which was in The Hague, so I was on the streetcar home with my bookcase, and I came to the end of the road, and our house was at the very opposite side, at the end of that street, and we had a streetcar stop in front of the house, and there was a streetcar stop at that point where I could look down the road where the house was at the end, and there was also a stop there. And I suddenly realized that my mother was kind of jumping around like a wild Indian on the sidewalk at that other stop, the stop before I got home. And so my mother finally signaled I had to get off and pointed into the street, and the streetcar driver, thank heaven, also watched my mother's Indian dance on the sidewalk and the pointing, and he looked down and he saw the same thing I saw. There was a big Gestapo truck in front of our house. So he came to a screeching halt with the streetcar and let me off. And so I asked my brother what had happened. She said, let's go to your piano teacher's house, to Mr. Bloementon, Felix Bloementon. And I'll tell you. And so we came to his house, and we stayed there for a few days until we got our bearings. But my father had walked into the main office hall of the building, which was a very high hallway with a mezzanine kind of balcony running around it too, because it was circular, because at the top of that building was a planetarium, which was also round, of course. So the whole area was round. And on the mezzanine was one of his colleagues, and my father's name was Johan but nobody called him Johan. They always called him Bob, which was totally irrational change of Johan, but that was also the name my mother called my father, Bob. And there were 2 Gestapo officers in the hallway, but there were always Germans walking through that building as a newspaper office, dropping off material that they wanted to have printed. And so my father didn't really pay attention to it. And so, but his colleague, Holland, Bob, thank you for coming in early or something like crazy like that. Can you come up here a moment? I have to show you something. And my father said, oh, okay. And so he took the little elevator up and walked to his colleague and he said, get out of the back door, they're here for you. And thank God there was nobody at the back door yet. And so he got out, phoned home and said, get out. You know, take what you need, but get out. So, actually, we didn't see him for a year, or I certainly didn't, and maybe my mother did, but only one time that he came to the door, and you must also have acting talent from your grandfather, because he was standing on the doorstep with a very dark, long beard and a hat on, and looked totally different. I didn't even recognize him. That is your mother home. And I said to my mother, there's a very funny man standing on the front step, and it turned out to be my father. And we were in hiding then, and he had come to the hiding place where we were. And we were actually gone from the house for a year until things had simmered down and that we thought it was remotely safe enough to return to the house, because all the neighbors were, of course, involved and said they had never seen anything anymore after that first moment. And probably he's gotten out of the books or something. So we came home again. And so that was also a part of my experience.
What was the feeling like for you as a young woman to experience the Canadian troops' liberation?
That was also a real tearjerker. I mean, to suddenly know that the war was ended, that all of a sudden word passed, it's over, and that they were waiting for the Canadians, but of course the Germans were still in possession, although officially they had capitulated. They were still there, of course, they were just gone up in smoke. But everybody was out with wearing orange, and the House of Orange, and I had a skirt with an orange camo belt, and all kinds of things. We were dressed up, and this whole mob actually went down the road towards the center of Voorburg, where there was a big overpass of the highway, which is still there. It's still the same. And on the bridge, actually, when you came towards the main street of Voorburg, there were actually still German guards. And one of these idiots actually started shooting at the crowd, except that his colleague, slammed his rifle up, and thank God nobody was hurt or killed. But he probably lost the plot for a moment. But anyway, and then the amazing thing happened. There were no troops coming in at all. There was this one single Canadian motorcycle suddenly coming down the road towards this huge crowd, which barely let him through, who brought the capitulation papers, because The Hague is a government city, to the headquarters of the German army, which had to be signed, and he had to bring back again before the troops would take over. So it was a bit of an anticlimax, but still very exciting to see this strange spectacle of one Canadian army man coming down on this motorcycle. I thought he was intensely brave to do that. And only afterwards we found out that he was actually bringing the capitulation papers. So actually up to that point we were still occupied in a sense. But anyway, then later the troops came in, within 24 hours. And that was of course very, very exciting. And they were absolutely engulfed in flags and girls sitting on tanks. Of course, my parents would never let me do anything like exciting like that. But it was a very moving day and very exciting. And we chocolate bars and of course cigarettes I didn't get from anybody, but it was all very exciting.
Well, that's great. Thank you.
Okay.